Hello, everyone. This is Doug Schnitzbein, and welcome to the Weekly Chat. I am the editor of The Weekly, the new digital magazine that we're putting out at Outdoor Retailer to keep you informed and give you tools during this difficult time. And along with that, each issue we feature an expert in the magazine, and then on Tuesday, and then on Thursday, we bring them here to the Weekly Chat so we can dive in deeper to what they have to say, and you get a chance to ask them some questions and interact with it. Today, I'm really lucky to have two amazing guests, Chris Goddard and Ash Williams. And Chris is the founder of CGPR, and Ash is at Keen, and the senior marketing director at Keen. And we're going to be talking about best practices when it comes to communication in these times, as well as how brands can do a lot of good in the world. Before we get into the conversation and before I introduce these two, I'm going to run through a few ground rules here with the slides. And before I do that, let me let you know that before we started, I had a few technical difficulties. So if I do disappear, I am going to have Ash and Chris ask each other a few questions until I come back. But hopefully that won't happen. If you are having trouble with receiving your audio, you can select the question mark in the upper corner of the webcast interface and select Test My System Now to see how it works. You can always disconnect and rejoin if you're experiencing any issues too. We love questions here too. And if you have a question, you can submit it in the box labeled Ask a Question on your screen. And we'd like to get to all of those. We did last week. Questions are sent directly to the moderator and not shown publicly. So as always, there's no bad question. This is being recorded, and you can access the on-demand file at Outdoor Retailer's website when we're done. All right, we have a few other slides here, and you can download these anytime you want from the website. And Ashley has also given us a handout that you will be able to grab after the conversation. After all that, let's talk to you two. Chris Goddard, you are the founder of CGPR. For 27 years, you've been working in the outdoor industry with some pretty amazing brands, including Adidas Terex, K2, Loa, Merrell, Outdoor Retailer itself, Primaloft, Gore, a hit list of great brands, among smaller brands too. But you actually started your career in DC as a lobbyist for the city of New York working on parks. And then you were working 7 years in the PR world for Edelman PR until you moved to Marblehead, Massachusetts, big sailing town. And there you run CGPR and enjoy sailing and time with your husband and dog. Ash has been working for the past 2 decades in sports and outdoor for brands including Adidas, Yakima, Amerisports. And for the past 6 years, he's been at Keen, helping to connect the brand with more fans and tell its value-led stories, which is a huge part of what Keen does. He's the senior marketing director at Keen, and he's been in that position since October 2014. He's originally from the UK and a very passionate outdoors person who loves to spend a trip with his family. And one other great thing about Ash is he sits on the board of an organization that's very near and dear to us, Outdoor Afro, which is the nation's leading cutting-edge network that celebrates and inspires Black connections and leaderships in nature. There we go. That's both of you two. And what we're going to talk about today is communication on all levels during this time of crisis. How to communicate during chaos, more or less, is what we're in now. We're going to talk about that on how you talk to the media. We're going to talk about how brands can communicate. We're going to talk about how you can communicate with retailers, how you can communicate with employees, and even how you can communicate with consumers. To start off, we'll start the questions off to Chris. And I'm going to ask you, what makes effective communication at this particular time especially difficult? Seems like an easy question, but
yeah, easy question, sure. I just wanted to thank everybody for taking the time on a Thursday before Memorial Day weekend, even though it's a strange one, for joining us today. To answer your question, I think what makes things difficult right now, 2 things: changing reality because we never know what's coming around the corner on any given day, but also changing media landscape. There's so much uncertainty. It changes by the hour. And having a communications program that can adapt to those changes is really critical. But again, changing reality and changing media landscape is completely out of our control. PR and media relations is oftentimes out of our control, but now more than ever.
Great. And Ash, how would you respond to the same question? What are you finding uniquely difficult at this time, which is a time none of us have ever faced before, obviously?
Yeah, Doug, I agree with the comments that Chris just made. I think there's a couple of other unique things that we're dealing with right now. And one is there's so many brands and organizations jumping in to help out those in need and those kind of on the front line of this pandemic. But I think there's a unique challenge there in terms of how do you show empathy and support without coming across as profiteering from the situation, which is a really challenging thing. And I know that most people, certainly in our industry and that we deal with, are doing it from a good place and not necessarily looking to profiteer from it. So I think that's one thing. And then just, I think that the concept of long-range planning is now almost obsolete. I think the new norm is going to become increasingly sort of more in the moment and more shorter term. We're going through a series of sell-in meetings right now with some of our key retail partners, and, looking 3 months out is probably about as far as people want to go. So, which is going to have a big impact on our industry, right? Because we were due to be talking about spring 21 soon, but a lot of people are still dealing with next week. So I think the time frame, the time spans are really going to be impacted by this as well.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point too about, doing what you do out of the good of your heart, as it's something that's natural to the brand and not something that you just want to be doing to make it seem like you care. But that's been a part of Keen. I mean, ever since I've seen the brand be around. What kind of things are you doing right now along those lines during this crisis that work naturally?
Yeah.
What you do?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. We back in the middle of March, we launched a program that we called Together We Can Help, which was a community-based program to sort of help deal with the current pandemic. And the first phase of that was to donate 100,000 pairs of shoes. That was a global program, and the idea was that we wanted to empower fans of the brand to be able to nominate people that they felt needed a pair of shoes. So anyone could be nominated. They were free. Once you were nominated, you would basically receive a code, and you would go on keenfootball.com and use that code, and we would send you a free pair of shoes. So that was a global program. We put that together probably in about 5 days, which required a lot of heavy lifting in terms of programming and changing our website. And we burnt through the shoes in probably, again, another 5 days. And we just know, looking at sort of fan responses and comments that we're getting back from people, that I think the vast majority of those went to people who really needed them and really appreciated them. And certainly, doctors, nurses, people on the front lines helping to fight the pandemic. So that was phase one, and it's been an ongoing program since the middle of March, where the next phase of this was that we converted one of the production lines in our factory to start making masks. And originally the masks were made to help protect Keen workers. And we brought some of the masks over to the US, and we donated 250,000 masks to, again, people on the front lines. And locally, we donated some to a local grocery chain called Fred Meyer. But then as a result of that, the demand for those masks has continued to grow. So now you find yourself in this position of what started off as something just to help people, has sort of grown, and it's grown tentacles. And, we're now looking at sort of creating a line of masks that we would offer up. So we're doing a lot of things around Together We Can Help, a lot of things for our retail partners as well that I think we'll come on to. So yeah, it's in our DNA to help people. who are in need.
Hey, Doug, I think that speaks to doing things with authenticity, which is really important because you see, to Ashley's point, a lot of brands that are not doing things with authenticity, and it sort of comes across as newsjacking. I mean, I think if you look at some of the good examples of communication outside of the industry and politics set aside, you know, Cuomo and Fauci were actually really good examples of crisis management, again, regardless of your politics. I think LL Bean and REI have been doing a pretty good job. And if you think of some of the, you know, the bloopers, you probably all remember when Frontier was going to charge $39 to keep that middle seat empty. And then they got so much backlash, they had to backtrack. So there's examples of good and bad for sure, but you just have to be authentic. And it's so important, especially now.
Yeah, I mean, that was how I was going to bring this question over to you, Chris, actually, was to ask you. So say a brand has this idea, they really want to do something they feel authentic, they feel great about, or a retailer or anyone really. They come to you as a communications professional and they say, hey, this is a part of us. How do we make it come off that it really is a part of who we are and what we're doing and not something we're doing just to get on the train of looking like we're doing good?
I mean, it's a really good question. Whatever they do has to be on brand, and it can't divert from the essence of their brand, but it also has to be authentic. But probably one of the most important things, that it has to be relevant to what's going on. So consumers have to identify with whatever the initiative is. But now is not really time to pivot from a brand's mission. You really have to be on brand. And you know, Ashley's what Keen did is a good example of that. It has to be also really thoughtful. You want to make sure you have the team in place that can execute it, because executing now is also really important. You don't have time for mistakes right now. So I would say you have to make sure it's on brand, relevant, and you have to be thoughtful, and you have to make sure the execution is completely dialed.
Would you? How do you feel along those lines, Ashley?
I totally agree. I mean, without stating the obvious, you can't fake authenticity, right? So if you are really struggling with how do I do this without it coming across as self-serving, then perhaps it is self-serving. But I think if you're doing it from the right place, then the majority of the time, you know, you will it will be perceived in the way that it was intended to.
And Doug, the consumers will know if it's not authentic, and you'll get backlash immediately. And it takes so much time to repair that trust, and consumer trust right now is so important. So you really have to think about it and be careful, you know, sort of be careful what you wish for too.
Absolutely. We have some questions and some good ones here. The first one is kind of a specific thing on Keen for you, Ash. Someone's asking on Keen donations, did you receive any backlash when the supplies of 100,000 shoes ran out? The questioner says, my company's hesitated to do something well-intended and authentic over concern that our impact would not be big enough to be meaningful. Maybe we'll start with Ash, and then you can address that one as well, Chris.
Yeah, Doug, that's a great question. I can give you a couple of examples here. That one was during the course of the donation program, we actually got hacked a couple of times, where we had some sort of malicious behavior happening on our site where it was an attempt to download multiple codes. That it didn't go anywhere. It didn't have any impact. We were able to detect that pretty quickly and actually pause the program for probably about 24 hours. And we put some other steps in place to mitigate that. So that was kind of an interesting experience. And we very much sort of learned as we went along. I think that there is an inherent risk when you do things for the first time that you maybe don't have a clearly defined process and sort of technology to deal with it. So we learned as we went along. We've got better and better as we've done this. But I think the other part of it is, yes, there can be somewhat of a negative backlash when shoes run out, or we actually started to do with some of our masks where we were putting a surprise gift with purchase. So when you bought a pair of Keen shoes, and we did this a few weeks ago, we had a limited amount of masks that we had available that we started putting in our shoe boxes to just send to people as just a thank you. And again, there can be some negative sentiment around that. And we experience the same on social when we post things around maybe an environmental cause. There tends to be, again, certain people that it just doesn't sit well with. But I think overall, the positive sentiment, the majority of the time, has always outweighed the negative sentiment as you go through things. And ultimately, it doesn't stop us from what we're doing. We're still going to respond to these situations, try and do the right thing, try and do good, but knowing that there is always the risk that there can be some negative backlash.
Sure. Doug, I think to the questioner, I don't think it really makes a difference what size the initiative or good deed is, as long as it's executed properly, honestly, and it's on brand. I mean, if you look at the huge fallout that Reese Witherspoon had with her attempt to give away dresses, I mean, that was a total nightmare, and she'll probably spend some time climbing out of that. But I don't think the size of what you're doing matters. If it's authentic and it's good and it's executed properly, and you've given these things, a good amount of thinking before you execute them, I think it's okay. I mean, not everybody's going to be able to be as generous as Keen. There will be small companies that do things in their local communities, which is equally important. So I think, again, it goes back to thinking about what you're doing and make sure you have everything dialed.
Sure, yeah. I mean, and we should be doing good just for the sake of it as well, too, right? If it makes any impact, that makes a difference, huh?
Right.
Yeah, definitely.
Moving on, I mean, have you guys seen some examples of really good communication, maybe outside of the industry even, so we don't have to play favorites, but who have you seen? I mean, you said Fauci and Cuomo. The other examples of brands or events even that you're seeing doing a really good job of communicating right now?
I mean, I think some of the what was really good was Boston Strong. When they didn't have the marathon, they had an unbelievable video and social initiative that Boston is still running. Boston is still caring. Some of the things you saw, again, coming out of New York tough. So I think there were some interesting marketing initiatives that were genuine. And the reason they were genuine and terrific is because they picked up on the soul of the city. So Boston is all about grit, and New York is about toughness. And the things I personally think that the things that came out of Boston and New York were really pretty interesting. Sure,
and that Boston Strong dates back to the bombing in the marathon in 2013 even, right? Yeah.
Right.
What do you think, Ash?
Yeah.
Who have you seen kind of outside the industry who's doing a great job?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting one. Outside of the industry, I think if you look at what's happening in the FMCG world, I think because if you think about it, there are these distinct phases of a pandemic. There's that kind of initial hunker down where you realize, you come to the realization of what's happening. So you got to hunker down, and then you get into that, in that dream phase, which I think is kind of what we're in right now. And we're starting to come out of that dream phase into the sort of the new normal, and we're imagining what this new normal will be, and we're starting to prepare for it and get ready. I think that's what a lot of brands are doing. So a couple that popped up in the news recently, KFC had an interesting approach where they're using some of their UGC content to now create their ads. And they have a hashtag called RateMyKFC. So while this KFC restaurants were closed, people were kind of going on this social campaign to create their own KFC. And there was some really kind of humorous interpretations of KFC. And now KFC have kind of done a clever thing where they're using that UGC in their campaigns. And then that kind of jumped out as an interesting one. Of them, Miller Lite have got an interesting approach where they're kind of taking that slightly irreverent tongue-in-cheek approach and sort of saying, well, I could have learned a language during this time, but instead I built this pyramid of beer cans. So they're kind of approaching it in a humorous way, but they're still acknowledging the reality of what's happening. They're not coming out with sort of unicorns and rainbows and saying everything is back to normal. I think they're acknowledging the current situation. So they were two examples that stood out. I think really clever would be new normal.
You guys still there? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, we're still here. You may have frozen.
Yeah, I think we froze for a sec. Is everyone back on? We all?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
We're all good.
Lovely. This is we need communication for our Zoom glitches.
Hey, Doug, I just wanted to jump on real quick for a second on that last question. I think when Ashley was talking about sort of the first phase it was sort of shock and awe. And you saw a lot of companies come out with those commercials with the somber piano music and in these challenging times, and we care about you. And I think at this point, consumers might be turned off by that. And so it's really important to do things that stand out, like KFC and Miller, because I think, I don't know about you, but everybody's sort of tired of those somber piano commercials, and people are looking for a little bit, not lighthearted, but a little bit more uplifting. There are no rainbows right now, but I mean, we're at this second stage. So I think it's really important. You have to do things to stand out.
Sure. And you brought me up to something that I think is really funny. I'm going to have to make a confession here that in Chris's piece she wrote for the Weekly, she was talking about some language you really don't want to use and saying things like in these difficult times, in these unprecedented times. And that was in her piece. And then my managing editor, Bevan Wallace, was nice enough to point out in the editor's letter I wrote before it went out while we were proofing it for that issue of the magazine, my first sentence was, in these unprecedented times. And, I think it's hard right now, right, it's a situation where we have to be really careful. So it's hard to come up with anything else than boilerplate sometimes to address it, right? But we have to try to get beyond that, right, to get beyond what you're saying there.
Yeah.
And how would you, tell people to approach that? I mean, we want to be careful, right? We want to say something like that, but you don't want to lead saying, in these dark days or in these unprecedented times, right?
But I mean, there are ways to choose different wording and be creative and thoughtful without using those same phrases. There are definitely ways around that. You just have to be thoughtful.
Sure, we got some great questions here. Someone said, "Yes, tired of somber commercials," and someone else noted that we let our non-internet savvy boomer parents take over our social media to add some levity to content during quarantine. To stay music in nature. Ash, what do you think on this level? Like staying away, the language you have to use, you have to be really, really careful right now, right? So something like humor, is it, are you afraid of humor? Are you afraid of being risky right now?
I think we're coming out of that phase. I think there was that initial feeling of treading very carefully, right, as people were basically dying around the world, or losing jobs, right? So I think there was a severity of the situation, but I think the news cycle seems to be switching gears a little bit now. I think there's a little bit of fatigue around reporting on this thing. I think we're at that point where everybody gets it. We know that things aren't great. And I think we've been in that dream phase for a while, and now we're looking at what is the new norm. So, we're working on new brand platforms for the future, but looking at it through this lens of what's been happening. So we definitely want to acknowledge that. But, at some point we're going to have to get back to not business as normal or business as usual, but we're going to have to start making sort of forward progress relatively soon. But I think, there is going to be a new norm. There's no doubt. So I think, even in advertising, showing groups of people together, I think we're going to have to look at that differently. So I think we're just going to have to acknowledge the new norm.
Sure.
You have seen, late night comics trying to just touch on that edge. Saturday Night Live have done some pretty interesting, clever things. But I would agree with Ash that it's definitely going to be different moving forward. But I think we have to get to that phase. We can't just stay in that dream state. We need to all move out of that.
Yeah. Well, let's break it down a little bit. Since you each have a different specialization, I'll ask a question of each of you kind of in your niche. And Chris, this is what you covered in the weekly this week is, what do you think are some real quick and dirty best practices for communicating with the media right now, which is your specialty?
I mean, the one thing about the media right now is that they're all at home, maybe a little bit less than, 8 weeks ago. But a lot of them are easier to reach. A lot of them are paying more attention to their email. So I think it's just making sure you understand what they're working on. If there are media that you're trying to reach out, make sure you're following what they're writing about. And everything has changed now. So you have anchors producing content. You have beat reporters completely writing off on different beats. So it's really important to make sure you know what the media is working on, the ones that you want to target. I think you also have to know their preferences, how they like to receive things, which is different. Deadlines right now are fast and furious. No one has the luxury of long deadlines anytime, anywhere. So you have to be mindful that when you're talking to media, that you have to turn things around much more quickly. You have to have your assets in order. If they want an interview, if they want a photo, you're going to probably have to turn it around more quickly because their editors are pushing those deadlines on them. And I think above all, it's patience. You have to have patience. Media are not getting back to people as quickly. And I think you also have to have empathy. In the media landscape, who knows what that's going to look like after this is all done. We'll lose magazines. A lot of magazines are totally not doing summer issues. Freelancers are going to be hurting. So I think empathy and patience are probably two things to have when you're dealing with today's media world.
I don't know. Do you have anything to add on those lines, Ash, on dealing with media maybe that you see or?
Yeah, no, I think I'd echo what Chris is saying on the media side of things. I think it's going back to what we were saying before about acknowledging the news cycle. I think when this thing kicked off, there was definitely an appetite to talk about what brands are doing, shoe donations, programs and things. But I think that there is, I think I get the sense that the media are looking for new stories now. So what is the new normal? What can they write about in a positive light? I think there's been enough reporting on the current situation. And, certainly in the outdoor world, I think now people are looking forward to new products coming out, new initiatives. I think there is definitely some optimism. We're talking to a lot of retail partners right now in terms of spring 21. There's definitely optimism, but it's being done in a cautious way. And I'd say it's the same for media as well.
I mean, the focus now is not so much on what happened in the beginning. It's how are people opening? How are people going to go to work? How are retailers going to approach consumers? How are consumers going to shop? So it's more about this next phase. And I think media have that in the mind. You'll still see coverage, but I think it's more on this next stage of what's happening.
Do you have any one just big takeaway that the brands and the retailers listening now can have in mind when they're dealing with media?
I think you have to be thoughtful. You have to be consistent. You have to be timely. I would say those three things, but really you have to know what they're writing on and how you can help them, because it really is all about helping them. And one other thing I will say is that it's also really important to say thank you to media, especially if you see something. It may not even apply to your particular company or your brand. I have found in the last 10 weeks, I will see something in the Times or the Journal on the weekends, and I will shoot somebody a thank you note. 75% of the time, I will get an email back during the weekend that says, hey, thanks for taking the time to write. So I go back to being patient and empathetic with the media right now.
Sure. And then, Ash, to kind of move the question around a little bit, what do you think are some best practices that, primarily brands, but also retailers can keep in mind when they're communicating with their consumers, since there's so many channels to do that in right now?
Yeah, I think when all of this first happened, I think most brands turned off probably all of their paid advertising, probably paused for a while. I mean, we did the same as well. And then I think as you're coming out of that hunker phase into that dream phase, I feel like, again, we're doing the same here. It's about going back to the point about authenticity and empathy. We're providing more information. We're trying to not be self-serving. We, like a lot of brands, have switched into doing a lot more things like live streaming, where we're trying to provide content that is usable and valuable to people. So we're bringing people in, third parties in. We're doing live streams. We did one around Mother's Day and how to make Mother's Day cards. We've done one on photography. So we're trying to provide a service to people, knowing that a lot of people are kind of at home right now and are looking for things to do. We're trying to provide tools that parents can use for kids. So we're trying to be a service. And I'd say that's true for our retail partners as well. So, we call them retail partners, and we genuinely want to be a good partner to them. So beyond things like, extending dating and the things that we've done at the beginning, we're now in that phase of we're doing a series of webinars for our sales team, but also it's open to our retail partners as well. And that was the link that's included in this as well, that we're doing 3 of these a week. So we're covering a whole slew of different subjects that are digitally focused. So if you don't know how to navigate the digital ecosystem, the hope is that these sessions will help. So they start from a pretty basic level and sort of build in complexity. And they're kind of open to anybody, really. Any brand, any retailer could join them, listen in. So trying to provide a service there. And as our retail partners start to reopen, we're looking at, we've created some sit and fit if you have people safe, we have these shields, these Perspex shields that we're going to be sending out to retail partners that you can do a sit and fit behind. We've sent out masks. We're going to be sending out sort of safety kits. So it's really providing a service and helping our partners get back to business, but doing that in a way that hopefully we're helping them. We're not doing it to be self-serving, and trying to help them get back to business.
Sure. I mean, do you think, you got to mention it before, do you think we're going to get to a point where people are going to have brands, masks are going to become very, very stylish. We're going to be showing off our favorite brands. I saw there was a hunting company that contacted me. They got their camo. Are we going to have fashion masks? Are we going to be at that point? Or
they've already started to do that. I mean, Nordstrom is going to start selling theirs. You can do custom masks. The Times has covered masks and custom masks for the last 2 or 3 weeks. Vanessa Friedman, who's a fashion editor, covered it. I mean, there was a story today about Nancy Pelosi's matching masks and her outfits. So you will definitely see that evolution for sure.
I spoke with Shelley Dunbar from Neptune Mountaineering here in Boulder, and she said the fastest moving thing at their store right now is a Neptune neck gear that people have been moving. I think people really want to show identity to that brand and to the store, right? And they can do that through your mask.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, you feel self-conscious wearing a mask, right? Especially if you're wearing one of those N95 or a medical mask. So that's one thing that Keen has done. So from the original mask that we created, which were actually made out of sort of upcycled footwear materials, we've now switched into a second phase of masks where we actually now have a line of masks that will merchandise with footwear, because who wants to wear a sort of a medical mask So to your point, we're trying to make the wearing of masks socially acceptable, so you don't feel as self-conscious wearing something that looks like a medical mask. So yeah, that's, I think, again, part of this new norm. And to Chris's point, that's already started.
I mean, Doug, I would also say sort of necessity is the mother of invention. Night Eyes is a client of ours, and this happened organically. They found out that people were using their gear ties for the bridge part of the masks to make a mask stay on and stay firm. And they ended up actually joining forces with Mystery Ranch to try and make these masks. But who knew that a gear tie would be good for the bridge of a mask? So that was an organic coincidence, which Night Eyes is now, continuing with. So it's pretty interesting. A lot of creativity and innovation. I mean, companies are being forced to be creative and innovative.
I keep waiting for the first performance mask. Where's the first high performance mask? For biking already. I mean, I joke, but it's also true. Those things are no fun to run and bike in. So, moving back kind of to the nitty gritty. What are some skills you guys have adapted? And maybe we'll start with you on this one, Chris. What are some skills you think we can adapt or take on to adapt to this news landscape and these regulations that are changing so quickly, right? Everything changes day to day, almost hour to hour. How can anyone be prepared to deal with that?
I mean, it's a really good question. Anybody's job as a PR pro is to stay on top of the news, but now you have to stay on the top of the news minute by minute. You really have to be, on trend and really connected with what is happening in the news cycle. It just means being more aware. I mean, PR is 24/7 in any case, but I also think one skill that we've adopted and, supported by my great team is being able to pivot really quickly, but also teaching your clients how to pivot and making sure they understand what that entails and having a team in place that will allow you to pivot and execute that pivot, perfectly. So it's really about being much more aware, being able to pivot and being able to execute, but also to anticipate if you can. And, actually, I mean, it's so hard to anticipate what's going on, but we're getting sort of past that stage right now where I think you can figure out more about anticipation. So I would say you have to be much more in tune with what's happening in the news world, in the social world, and be able to make that change quickly.
Sure. What do you think along those lines, Sash? How do you build any kind of strategy when things are changing day by day?
Well, I think agility is the name of the game here. The idea of having an LRP that might be looking 3 years out. I think now the LRP is probably at the most 3 months out. I think you got to have that ability to stay on top of what's happening and then pivot accordingly. I mean, what we're doing right now, there's no way we would have known we were going to be doing this 3 months ago. So I think that's going to be the new norm as well. And I think in terms of that switch from sort of traditional tactics to more digitally led tactics, I think we've been talking about that for years now. So there's nothing new there. But I think if anything, this current situation has accelerated that for a lot of people. Because obviously with digital gives you that ability to be more flexible, to test numerous different things and be able to dial one up and maybe dial other ones back. So I think, again, you're seeing that they're shifting their spends into, I look at all the events and things that we have planned for the year. I honestly don't know when we will get back to thinking about those types of things. So I think for the time being, it's going to be very much what platforms can you use that enable you to be able to pivot quickly and test things. So sort of, test and modify and learn as you go along. I think that's going to be really important going forward.
Yeah, I mean, you constantly have to reevaluate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So we got a very specific question real early on that actually works in right now. And it's very specific towards you, Ash. And it was this: how does short-term planning that we're doing now impact the year-out seasonality of the product launches? Planning the following spring and the prior spring, for example. Are there thoughts on shrinking those product development timelines? Yeah,
I feel like we could probably spend an hour on this one. I think within all of this, the sort of the production, whether you're in footwear or apparel, those production timelines are much, much harder to shift. I think there are going to be certain industries that have much shorter lead times, but this hasn't really impacted our ability to ideate, design, create, produce, ship product much quicker. And we've been looking at shortening that production time for a long time. So I think the time that we could shave off has already been shaved off. I think, if anything, what we're working through right now is the idea of traveling around the country to sell products in is not happening. Appetite from retailers in terms of ability to commit pre-season to things is shifted. It's usually led sell in-season orders. Retailers are still going to be sitting on inventory that they're going to be carrying over into next year. So how do you help drive sell-through of those products? So I think all in all, it's not going to shorten the time of producing and manufacturing product, but I think it's going to impact the way that you sell that in, probably your line construction. Probably, I think a lot of brands are probably going to be reducing the number of SKUs that they deal with as well, and they have, and probably focusing on more on their sort of core products and bringing in some of those sort of key marquee innovation products as well at the same time. Hopefully that answers the question in some way.
In some way, yeah. Again, it's hard to know, right?
Yeah.
Now we have a big bomb of a question here. And Chris, I think with your PR and communication experience, we're going to start this one with you. And the question is, do you think we will ever return to a traditional outdoor retailer show again? What are your thoughts on these virtual trade shows? Are you participating? So maybe thinking along the lines of, human connection, how important is this?
I think it's a really interesting question. I think everybody is evaluating large gatherings at this point, but I do think it's very hard to replace those moments in the aisles, that we all loved at Outdoor Retailer. Tony Hsieh of Zappo calls those happy accidents. So I think probably for the short term, I think it's going to be really difficult to envision large gatherings like an Outdoor Retailer. But I do think there's a purpose. It's a question of what that's going to look like. From a media perspective, as far as interest in virtual showings, we did a survey right when this started, and clearly there have been a significant number of virtual showings by a number of brands and PR agencies, and I think that's probably going to be the way for a long time. There's appetite for them as long as they're done correctly and with great technology. But the question of trade shows is, I think, definitely on the table and going to be reevaluated. And I'm not sure that brands have the appetite to spend the money for large trade shows and large booths. But I also don't know that you're going to see media that will have budgets to travel to those trade shows anymore. So I think, the virtual option is definitely going to be on the table for a long time.
And I will say that Outdoor Retailers currently got a plan that they're about to announce. It's going to address a lot of it too. So I think that's important to know, especially where we are. Ash, what do you think along these lines? The trade being together, this human connection, right? It's still important, isn't it? We need to do that.
I agree. Yeah. I think one of the negative impacts of all of this is that, we're all spending our lives on Zooms and Microsoft Teams and all these virtual platforms, and we're missing that human interaction. And whilst I think that, you can come up with some effective solutions and do a sort of a digital trade show, to Chris's point, the opportunity to meet people, talk to them, interact with people, you can't really replace that. And I think that's where the value of those trade shows is so important. Look at what Keen has been doing over the last few years in terms of Keen Fest. Every summer we put on a celebratory thank you party for people with free food and free drink, and that's just an opportunity for everybody in the industry to come together and celebrate. It's really hard to do that virtually. So I think short term, no. I think there's going to be very little appetite for it and next to no money to do it. But I think longer term, yeah, I think most of us are missing those opportunities to interact with others in the industry.
Absolutely. And, I wonder too, as you're saying, there's going to be this exhaustion, right? We're all getting exhausted of doing the kind of thing we're doing now, maybe even digital. We're being assaulted by digital communication, and it's draining. New York Times had a story about Zoom exhaustion, right? And so are there ways to communicate that aren't digital that people can engage in now?
It's a good question. There is the old-fashioned way of picking up the phone, which I found I've had an opportunity to talk to people I haven't talked to for a long time, even journalists who are more apt to pick up their phone. And I think that personal touch, it's not the same as seeing them or having a cup of coffee or going to New York and showing media what you have to show. But I do think reaching out via phone is really an effective way to stay engaged. And I agree with you on the Zoom. I think I'm over it, but right now it is an effective tool. We just have to. There are also effective ways to use Zoom, so it's an interesting time.
Do you think, Ash, there's going to be a time when this all break? You're talking about a new normal. Is there going to be a point when people are just rushing to get back to their old lives, to get back to some semblance of normal, to get back to big trade shows, to hugging people, to not wearing masks?
Yeah. I think that there's going to be a long tail to this. I could see this for the next 18 months, 2 years, there being real caution that, let's say next summer there's a huge trade show. Are people going to want to rush to that and behave as they did? I don't know. I question that. I think there's going to be caution around this. I think people are still going to be cautious of big group settings. I think, they're going to probably be wearing masks. They're going to be washing their hands. Maybe there'll be a new way of greeting people that's not a handshake. Maybe it's a virtual high five or an elbow touch. Or I think there's going to be caution, absolutely, around this. It's not going to go away quickly. There's going to be a hangover that I could see going on for at least another 18 months or so on this one. It's going to stick in people's memories for quite some time.
You agree with that, Chris? Do you think?
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I think I know there's a hunkering right now for people to get back to the office. My team is looking forward to getting back to the office. You are seeing an uptick on people traveling, even just riding around here in traffic. But I would agree with Ash that I think there's going to be a very long tail, and people will think about this long and hard before they get back to where we were.
Yeah. Well, maybe I'll lead that into start and ask you this, because what are you feeling really positive about? What are you feeling good about in these times? What's making you feel like there's a lot to build on and move forward and look forward to 18 months from now?
I would say the creativity and the innovation that we're seeing now, but also examples of human spirit. It's incredible. What beats people clanging on pots and pans at 7 p.m. in Manhattan every night, or, the Blue Angels flying over to thank healthcare workers. So I think it's rallied people. It's brought out the best in some cases, amazing innovation, amazing creativity. So that's what's giving me hope. And you're starting to see more and more. That's what excites me.
What about you, Ash? How are you feeling? What are you feeling positive about moving forward? What is there to build on? What's good right now?
Yeah, I think just building on what Chris was saying, I've seen lots of examples of real innovative approaches to the current situation, and people who I think were in that initial hunker down phase and didn't quite know what to do. But I think we will all come out of this stronger. and a result of what's happening. And I think it's going to help a lot of people reset their values. So things that probably we took for granted before, I think we're going to be valuing more and more. I know that, sitting on Zoom calls for the majority of the day, when I get outside, I look at the outdoors with a new lens that it just feels that much fresher and brighter and more magnified. And spending time with my family is the same. So I think that value set is going to be changed. But the one example I did want to throw out there real quick was on one of the digital training sessions we did last week. We invited a partner of ours on, so the Land Sharks from Michigan, who are this great couple-owned, especially outdoor store, and they were in that sort of hunker down phase and didn't quite know what to do, but have been incredibly resourceful and have done a series of things that were just brilliant to see. And they're really embracing live streaming. They're dressing as sharks and doing deliveries, home deliveries, but from a safe distance, dressed as sharks. They're doing shark spottings in their neighborhoods. They've been incredibly innovative, but as a result, they're going to come out stronger from this. So seeing how people embrace it has been really kind of uplifting. It was really good to see.
Doug, the other thing I just wanted to mention is that we actually did a survey of people as to why they went outside during this pandemic, what they were doing. And the brightest thing that came out of that survey was that 82% of consumers that discovered the outdoors for the first time are going to stay engaged. So there's this whole new group of consumers that are discovering the outdoors, and it's an amazing opportunity for the industry. So that's really positive, and that's hopeful.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think that's hopeful, for the trade shows too, that all these people are going to be coming in and getting back. And we're going to see, one of the great things about Outdoor Retailer and the brands we see at the show is we always get these new small brands. And when I think about those new small brands, I think about this guy I met with a shoe at one trade show who barely had a booth, Martin Keene, who was just there by himself the first show I was at. And 2 shows later, it was just a massive operation, which was crazy. Do you guys think it's important still, too, that we need to find these small brands like Keene used to be, like so many brands you've worked with in the past, Chris? We need to all get together and find those brands as well, too, don't we?
Yeah, I think it's definitely important to support those small brands. I think it's going to be important for these new consumers that we're seeing that we make product available to them in language that they can understand, at places that they can purchase, and at prices that they can afford. So I think that there's an opportunity there. But to your point, it's really important to nurture those smaller brands. But I think the journey for those smaller brands is going to be harder. I think it's going to be harder for them, but it doesn't mean it's any less important.
What do you think about that, Ash, coming from a brand that started from one guy?
Yeah, 100%. I think newness is key. And I think having these smaller brands coming up and becoming bigger brands, and I think a rising tide lifts all boats. I think it's really good to see the innovation and things that people come up with. It's always great when you walk around like the Venture Out section, an outdoor retailer, and see these smaller brands and see what they're doing. It's, often people start these things from an idea or a passion that they have for something. I think we should 100% embrace that, encourage it, and foster those types of brands to come through. I think it's really important for the whole industry, not only to bring new people in, but to bring new brands in. And I think that's only a good thing.
Absolutely. Well, let's look at, we've got a few more questions in here. And if anyone else wants to add some questions, that's great. We've got about 5 minutes left on our scheduled time. If the 2 of you open for staying a little longer to answer a few questions as well, is that okay with you?
Yeah, I've got time.
Great.
Of course. Can't go anywhere, so.
You're gonna get your cool mask, Ash. You got to get that.
Yeah.
So we just got a question in, and I guess we can start with this one with you, Chris. And it is, good one. And let me say something before we finish too. It's how should the results of the study that Leave No Trace conducted on travel and national park visitation, people are staying closer to home, travel beyond 15 miles has drastically decreased during the COVID event, inform messaging for those in the outdoor industry moving forward. And before you answer that, I just want to say that two weekly chats from now, we are going to be speaking with Leave No Trace about this very survey. So, but anyway, what do you think of that question, Chris? Because I think that goes into what your survey is looking at as well about local participation.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's going to be the way of the world. I can't take credit for this, but Owen Comerford, the CEO of Moosta, was calling attention to staycations. I think people will be traveling local, will be going to regional places, maybe be going to their local parks. So I think it's incumbent upon, the industry and communicators to talk about how you do that, the benefits of doing that, because that's going to be really important. I think people are going to be really hesitant to go those long distances. I also think you'll see people doing a lot of car camping because it gives them their own space, but again, enables them to go someplace local. So I think it's going to be a really important part of getting outdoors for the next phase. I think. Did I answer your question, Doug? Or
well, the questioner's question. I think so. Absolutely. Yeah. I think the big question is how does it inform the messaging? What kind of messaging are brands, retailers, consumers, nonprofits, if they know people are staying closer to home, how is that going to affect the way they present themselves?
I mean, I think you just have to sorry, go ahead, Ash.
I was going to say, I think it's, rather than focusing in on those sort of big epic trips to, different countries, I think there's going to be a focus on keeping it more realistic, keeping it real. And I think that's going to be sort of part of the new messaging. It's very much on our radar right now that if you look at sort of consumer shifts in terms of the appetite to travel, spending time with family, being cautious with their money, appreciating what is local, more than perhaps that sort of bucket list of trips that you would be going on. So I think that's absolutely going to become part of the narrative. Absolutely.
Anything else to add on those lines, Chris?
No, I think no, I would agree. I just think that's the way it's going to be for the next few months, if not year.
Here's a good question right on top of that, though, is do you think we will be seeing a bigger shift to shop local versus third-party online?
I mean, yeah. Ash, do you want to start on that one?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I've sort of heard a couple of different schools of thought on this one, that, we've been living in this sort of digital time where everything is Zoom and we're spending money online. I think there's one school of thought that says that people have been exposed to this now more than before, and they'll want to keep going and continue to shop online as opposed to going into store. But then I've also, read that there's people that are going to be really itching to get into stores, to buy locally, to visit their outdoor retail stores. And plus, I think as well, that's why the outdoor retail is still the sort of, the lifeblood of the industry in terms of that sort of high service, high touch, premium products type environment, and that sort of knowledgeable store associate that can help you buy the product that you need. So I honestly don't know. I think there will be people that are really itching to get into stores, to pick up product, to touch it, look at it, and interact with people.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of shop local campaigns beginning to, hit my computer screen and radio and even TV. And I also think there's a sentiment to support local retailers. These are people that been in your community for a long time. But I would agree with Ash that people have gotten accustomed to shopping online. So it's going to be an interesting path to see where that goes.
I mean, do you think people will want to support, we're talking about doing good right now. I think a lot of people want to do good. Do you think there'll be a lot of impetus to support local stores as a community effort and as a way to do good as well, right? As opposed to just getting the cheaper deal.
Yeah, I think some people will, for sure. I think it depends on your motivations. If you're motivated by price and maybe convenience, then you'll continue to shop online. If you value your local retail, we're seeing a number of stores offer up the, purchasing gift cards through their local stores. I think it just depends on your motivations.
Here's another, go back to another question we had here is, what do you envision being the most lucrative avenues for your brand to leverage in keeping your consumers up to date? We'll start that one with you, Ash.
The most lucrative?
Yeah, the most
lucrative avenues.
To leverage keeping your consumers up to date. So,
I'll answer this how I think the question is. We'll continue to focus on social as a channel, because it goes back to what we were saying before. I think that's the most cost-effective way of getting our content to the right people, being able to sort of test it, modify it, learn from it. So I think if this is answering the question, I think that's going to be the focus for us going forward. Not that it really hasn't been, but I think in the absence of right now being able to do events or store events or any of those more traditional things, that's certainly where we're looking to invest our money.
I mean, Doug, I would support what Ash says, because, making sure you're pushing out the right content about either product features or how to travel local to reporters that are writing for the online and the short-term outlets is going to be really important. They want that content quickly, and that content can also provide a service and talk about what products to buy, how to use it, how to plan a trip. So the PR would definitely need to support what's going on from the social standpoint, for sure.
And would you also think, I think also, as far as channels, you also think it's important for brands to still advertise digitally and print and to support that media you're talking about communicating with, obviously needs advertising to stay alive. So maintaining those partnerships between brand and media through advertising are pretty important too right now, right?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the idea of a partnership as well, right? And supporting not just our retail partners, but our media partners as well.
But that is also going to change, just because you've seen a huge dip in advertising, at least on the classic print. But to Ash's point, those partnerships have longevity, and you just have to figure out what is that next phase of the partnership going to look like.
Sure. All right, let's try 5 minutes over. Let's try another question. It's RV and camping marketing. Is our up-and-coming marketing pivot with our comfort footwear styles? It's not a question. It's a comment, I guess. So RV and camping, these are going to be big markets for everyone, I guess, right now, right?
Yeah, if you look at what's been on the media, the Times did a really interesting story on it last weekend. The Journal did an interesting story on it. I know the Times is doing another story. So going back to people wanting their own space, but being able to travel, on the road, it's definitely going to be an important trend moving forward, for sure. I just don't think you'll see no one's going to be going to Europe, I don't think. You might see business travel resume, but the whole RV, yeah, that's going to be pretty hot.
Are you guys moving towards any of that, Ash?
RVing?
RV, camping, casual camping, these new customers, right?
Not necessarily. I think that's part of a bigger story in terms of staying closer to home, maybe camping, making the outdoors more accessible. It's not, and again, Keen has never been the brand that's going to take you to the top of the mountain. We're the brand that's going to take you around the mountain and to the next mountain and beyond. So we've never been that sort of extreme high-end performance position brand. So I think the idea of positioning the outdoors accessible to everyone is super key. And obviously you need to do that through messaging, tone, visuals, and sort of all of that. But yeah, camping for sure it will continue. Car camping will continue to be part of the narrative. Absolutely.
Sure. Well, let's wrap it up with one last question. We've gone a little over here. And Chris, I guess we'll start this one with you because this is kind of right in your wheelhouse. What will the media landscape look like in the future? What are we looking at in the future, 6 months, 18 months, 2 years from now? What do you think it's going to look like?
It's a really good question. I think there's going to be a definite big shakeup, certainly in the world of print. What's interesting is during this time, you've seen an increase in online subscriptions, like certainly for the Times and the Wall Street Journal. You're seeing a lot of the traditional print combine and even cancel issues for the summer. It's the first time Vogue will be combining summer issues and only have one. You'll see a shakeout in staff. I mean, BuzzFeed and Vice cut a bunch of positions on Friday. I think it's going to be greatly reduced. I think you're going to see a lot of change. I think it's going to take 6 months to a year to finally shake out. I think it's going to be dramatically different. And I think it's going to be tougher for freelancers in some cases. And I think as PR professionals, we just have to stay on top of that and make sure that we support, the channels that we work with now to make sure that we're helping the journalists do their job. I wish I knew exactly what it was going to look like. It will be dramatically changed.
Do you have anything to add to that one, Ash, on media landscape, maybe on, the way you see your whole, as someone asked before, in the avenues of communication, what do you see the whole network looking at?
Yeah, I totally agree with Chris. I think there's going to be continued consolidation in the media industry. I think it's going to accelerate what was already happening before. If anybody hasn't latched onto this, now is a really good time to advertise. Media is, in general, media rates have gone down. CPMs are low. Media consumption is way up. I mean, I was looking at some stats the other day that said things like listening to music is 58% up and watching movies is 49% up. Facebook's monthly users are up 50%. Twitter's are up 23%. People are at home and they're consuming media. You still got to create the right form of advertising, the right messaging, and get the right message in front of the right person at the right time. But now's a really good time to advertise. So if that's a positive takeout from this, I'd say spend money now. Your conversion rate won't be great, but your CPM rate will be pretty good.
Yeah, Doug, we had a client that just is putting an ad in Time Magazine, a full page ad, which they got at a significantly reduced rate.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the truth is, media is not in trouble because people aren't consuming it or it's not good media. Media is in trouble because companies, as you said before, put the pause on it because they're scared and not sure what's going to do. And that's the revenue stream for media.
Right.
Well, let's end on one last positive, uplifting thought from each of you. And Chris, what is your positive, uplifting thought to leave everyone with here?
My positive thought is that it's a great industry to be involved in. There's nothing that can take away from the heart and soul of who we are and what we can accomplish. And we've been here before. We were here in 2008, and we were here after 9/11. There's no question that this industry will be strong and get through this. And just to be able to be involved in it and work with the great brands and companies that we do, I'm incredibly heartened and hopeful.
Sounds good. Ash, what's your positive closing thought here?
We will get through this. There's no doubt. We will get through it. We'll come out positive. We'll be stronger as a result for it. We'll get through it. It may suck right now, but we'll get through it. And just remember, the outside is free, and it's open to everybody. So we can all play our part in encouraging everyone to get outside.
Fantastic. Well, I really enjoyed talking with you both and having you both on here at the same time. It's been great to have different perspectives. You guys can all join us next week. We are going to be talking to Dirk Sorensen, who's the Executive Director of Sports Industry Analysis for the NPD Group. And he's got numbers on retail, the hard numbers on what's going on now. Big surprise is that coolers are oddly down, but fitness is up. So look for that next week. Thank you, everyone who was here, stuck around for a few extra minutes.
Thank you.
Really Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, Doug. Thanks, Chris. See you. Take care.
Bye, Ash.
See you guys.